space that we have today at the Hans Rosling Center in Seattle. We're delighted. This is actually, since Big Heart was founded in the end of 2021, this is the first opportunity we've had to do an in-person or hybrid event. So we're really delighted to have everyone in both spaces here today.
Yay.
I know we'll have a couple of folks still continuing to join us. And so as we get started today, I want to take a moment, as we do each time, to acknowledge the space that we are occupying, both and living and working. So at the University of Washington, we learn and teach and live on or near the unceded ancestral lands of the Coast Salish people, the land which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Duwamish, Puyallup, Squamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. We pay our respects to elders past and present, whose ancestors have resided here since time immemorial. Coast Salish peoples and many other Indigenous peoples continue to thrive in these lands, alive and strong. And I felt as we started, since many of you I've had the pleasure of knowing already, to introduce myself. My name is Jen Balkus. I'm a faculty member in the School of Public Health, and I am one of the co-directors of the Big Heart program. For those of you, if this is a program that's new to you, both either here or online, we just like to share a little bit about the program. It is focused on training undergraduate, graduate, and scholars who are interested in research, and provides various meetings and opportunities like to connect with different individuals working in this space, like we have in our seminar series. So we have mentorship opportunities, we have a mentoring the mentor series, and we've connected folks with different sort of formal mentoring opportunities, as well as opportunities for work in the field. We have a number of individuals who have registered to become Big Heart scholars. This is not limited by any geography, so any Indigenous scholar across the United States is welcome to participate and take part of these opportunities. And we also support folks to attend the UW annual Principles of STI and HIV Research Public Health Practice course. One of the key features of the program has been the seminar series, and I just want to acknowledge this is coming up on the end of our 2023 academic year with our last seminar that will be held on June 28th. So stay tuned for more details. And we always have information about the program on the website. In addition, I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that the program is actually about to enter its third year, which is phenomenal. This started off as a one-year pilot, and we're so grateful for NIH and CFAR for all the support we received to keep this program going. And this program was developed by myself and Dr. Karina Walters, who has actually transitioned to National Institutes of Health, and we're thrilled for her new role. She's going to be in an incredible opportunity to be leading Indigenous research and supporting research across the United States. So we're super sad to see her go, but thrilled for the impact that she will have and has already had. In addition, I'm going to be leading the University of Washington as well. I'm going to be joining HIV, STI, and hepatitis C program with Seattle King County Public Health. And this is sort of with these two transitions is a perfect opportunity to transition to our incoming co-directors. Oops, which I apologize, I'll take that slide. It's not Karina's doppelganger, it's Dr. Michelle Johnson Jennings, so we'll make sure to correct that. And Dr. Roberta Oriana, who are phenomenal researchers and part of ERIE, part of our CFAR, and we're just so thrilled that they'll be stepping into these co-director roles in June and hopefully for years beyond. So please look forward for communications from them and support them as they take on this. And one more thank you as clearly today's time of transition, to express our sincere gratitude to Marcus Conde, who's sitting in the second row here. Marcus has been our program administrator extraordinaire for the last year or so, and really helping to keep Big Heart going, and is going to be moving on to pursue a. So we're super excited for everything that Marcus is literally his last day, so we wish him well. And we also have, oh my goodness, I just saw our prior program administrator, Anya Lewin, is here with us today. So this feels like it's a great sort of Big Heart reunion, even though we've never been in the same place before. All right, with that, Now, just briefly acknowledge all of our support. As I mentioned, this is support from the NIAID, and we've got tremendous support across our CFAR, including from our CFAR directors, Dr. Connie Kellman, Dr. Jan Simone, Susan Mello, and Lynn Newcomb, have always been incredibly supportive of this work and helped us kind of from the ground up to build this program. So with that, I will stop talking because you didn't come to here to hear from me. You came to hear from our illustrious speaker, Harlan Pruden, who's come down from Canada, and I'm going to let Harlan introduce themselves and share about their talk for today, which is relational accountability, relations, Two-Spirit, and Indigenous health research as a site of reconciliation. So Harlan, welcome. We're delighted to have you. Let Marcus switch our slide.
Yes. A formal thank you in my language. Danze, Harlan Pruden, Wakatno Mani, Motormouth Mabel Nikasan. Nihak Nehiyô Nihak Ayakwe. Kinona Scopen in Awawa, Squamish, no, sorry. Ooh, I wrote it down. Coast Salish people, Duwamish, Tuala, Squamish, Tuala, as well as Makashu, Igwa, and Makashu. Greetings, my relatives. My government name is Harlan Pruden. My Indian name, and I do use the I word, is actually in Sioux. I was doing some Two-Spirit work at the Rosebud Reservation, and they honored me with the name Wakant no Mani. Wakant being spirit, good spirit, bad spirit, neutral spirit. I can do good just as well as I can do bad, or I can like suck up a lot of space, which I hope I don't do, and do nothing, right? So that part of my name is the responsibility of how do I want to show up. And so I try to show up with good words, good actions, and good thoughts. And when I fall short of that intention, a mistake is only a mistake if we don't learn from it. So every misstep or mistake is a learning opportunity. It's built into my name. Nom is to, and Mani is a sacred journey. So I was going to get that translated into Cree. I am First Nations Cree, Nehiyô in my language, the people of the four directions. My mother was a member of the Beaver Lake Indian Reserve, and she married my father. Her band registry went to Saddle Lake. I registered as a member for the Saddle Lake Indian Reserve. And just a big, big formal thank you to the Coast Salish people for tolerating my presence. And I just would like to humbly thank them, as well as to position myself as a guest in and on their territory. There we go. I will stand over here. No, there we go. Okay, right there. Perfect. And then I go back to desktop. Or do I just keep screen? I'll do it. Okay. And we're there. Perfect. All right. Oh, and my other name is going to be Motormouth Mabel because I have so much to talk about. We're going to be talking about Two-Spirit framing and understanding bit. Then I actually would like to turn and really quickly pivot to the decolonization work of the research ecosystem that we are developing and how we're doing that within the Two-Spirit Dry Lab. And that will also be grounded within our relational accountability and being in good relations with one another through research. And these are like methodological reflections for the Two-Spirit Dry Lab on capacity bridging within communities, Indigenous communities across Turtle Island. So what and who Two-Spirit is? A lot of this is already in your package. So the concept of Two-Spirit, first of all, it is a placeholder. And it is also, and as a result of it being a placeholder, it is a community organizing tool or strategy and not an identity. Two-Spirit is a way to identify those individuals who are Indigenous to Turtle Island and are sexually and or gender diverse. And it's a way to organize that community, but then it becomes a nation-specific conversation. And that leads to the second point, that it doesn't make sense unless it's contextualized within an Indigenous or framework or community. Prior to colonization, It was a gender analysis as opposed to a sexual orientation analysis, meaning some nations had 2 genders, while others had 3, some had 4, and some nations had 10 or 12 different genders. How do we conceive of these non-binary conceptions of gender and gender analysis? We'll talk a little bit about that. Today, most people associate the term with lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, questioning, intersex, the list can go on and on, Indigenous peoples. However, the work of Two-Spirit organizations, leaders, community members, elders is more akin to this traditional understanding of who were we prior to colonization and contact, and what is the application as well as the relevancy of those teachings and ways for today. I've collected about 130 terms, and I have built upon this database from Willie Roscoe and their seminal work that they did with the Bay Area Gay American Indian Organization back in 1988. Now, there are omissions, there's flat out wrong information, and there is incomplete information within this database. You're like, tap the brakes, Harlan, Motormouth Mabel. Why are you getting all misinformation? Well, I wish that I could sit up in the ivory tower and comb through this database and make sure that it's absolutely pristine and beautifully clean. That could take a lifetime, and it could take many lifetimes. And in those intervening lifetime or times, more of this knowledge and teachings will be lost. So these next 9 slides support a conversation. What I encourage you to do is to look at this database. Is your nation represented there? If it's not, you have some work to do. If it is, you also have some work to do to validate it. For the entries that I have worked on, I try to do a triple or double validation. Primary, get 1 primary speaker, and then I try to get 2 other primary speakers to update the database. The Cree entry is a good, clean entry. It was validated by 21 primary Cree speakers. They'll be recording. I am so happy, and I just updated this earlier today. For the WIAT, based in Northern California, the Band Council basically just issued a statement of, this is our word for Two-Spirit people. And let me make this clear. For the WIAT people, it is ICU, and it is for the WIAT, meaning we are the people, and we are the people is inclusive of our Two-Spirit relatives. And do not be clear that this word, Gomal, is what we officially say is our word for Two-Spirit relatives. That's coming from band leadership. We're not alone. If you look at other Indigenous communities across our peoples or nations across the world, although they wouldn't use Two-Spirit, Two-Spirit is only here for Turtle Island. It is reserved, pun intended, only for Turtle Island. But there is a similar sort of gender analysis and gender diversity that existed in many Indigenous communities across the world. You have the Bulbul in Pakistan, the Kinara in India, the Mahu in Hawaii, the Bafokane in Samoa. And again, this is an incomplete list. It would be really nice to have an international convening of saying, how do we want to organize and mutually support? Is that under Two-Spirit, or is it under some other modality? How do we have that? There are only about 20 known historical images of our Two-Spirit relatives. I wish that I could share some stories of our folks that have gone on to the spirit world, that are leaders, and that have always been here and will always be here. Now, we cannot talk about Two-Spirit without making sense of this picture. This is an early picture of the Colorado Indian Industrial School. This one school, it opened in 1879, closed in 1918, and it had about 100,000 Native children go through its doors. Do you know how many they graduated from this one school? 158 out of 100,000. But what does this have to do with being Two-Spirit? Well, this has everything, and this has nothing to do with Two-Spirit. If we look and we look at this picture, we see that the middle third, and I'm going to make the assumption that they're all male assigned, their sex is male, and their gender expression is coded with pantsuits, hair cut over the ear. Where in the lower third is I'm going to make the assumption that they're all females, and their gender would be young, their gender expression are young women or girls, and that's coded with skirts and shoulder length hair. Where for Two-Spirit people, I know there's Two-Spirit people there. I will bet my eye teeth, I am so confident. But you can see that imposition of that rigid binary gender system that was imposed upon us as Indigenous people. Gone to the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, or even the 10 different genders, leaving room for only their two genders, young men and boys, young men, and young women and girls. So begins the colonization of sex, sexuality, and gender that we are still working on, and it is the legacy of colonization. So Two-Spirit is the intersection of those who embody diverse sexualities, gender, both roles and expressions, and are Indigenous to Turtle Island, is a community organizing tool and not an identity. Two-Spirit will mean something different depending on what nation an individual is from or member of. There is no one way of being Two-Spirit. Two-Spirit is going to mean something different if you're Cree, Dene, or if you are, Duwamish. So there is no one, that's why Two-Spirit, if it's made as an identity, it's really nonsensical because it's a nation-specific conversation. And then finally, it refers to a history and tradition that predates Western notions and concepts such as lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, questioning, intersex. And it's about reclaiming and restoring our rightful place of honor, respect, and dignity within the individual's nations. This is deep decolonizing work that centers one's ingenuity, that calls Two-Spirit people home, and is thereby about mending the sacred hoop. Now, I wish that we all had base knowledge, so I could just say, Two-Spirit, done and done, right? I had to do that to, what are the implications within a research group or within a research setting? And so this is the Two-Spirit Dry Lab, which is Turtle Island's first ever research group that solely focuses on Two-Spirit people, communities, and experiences. We're a rather large group. We're around 35 members. We are settlers and Indigenous people. 54% of our membership is Indigenous, but we work alongside of our relatives so that we can get into good relations with one another. And so we are a lab of reconciliation of how do we get in better relations with one another. We just had our strategic planning out at Loon Lake last week, and this was the group that could join us. And it was a beautiful time. So how we work. So when most research groups get together, it's always about the what. What do we want to do? How do we want to do it, right? Well, because we're Indigenous, we're trying to center Indigenous ways, the more important is the process. How are we convening? And so there is that effort of that building of the Indigenous ways of knowing and being and doing. We are a transdisciplinary collaboration of Indigenous and non-Indigenous EPIs, knowledge translation leads, sociologists, researchers, elders, community members, artists. You just have to have a curiosity of wanting to do research, and that is the only membership requirement. That's it. We also center Indigenous methodologies and approaches. We build upon and use Albert Marshall, who is this Mi'kmaq elder. It's called the two-eyed seeing approach. The two-eyed seeing approach is putting two knowledge systems in play at the same time. With one eye, we look at the good things that our settler and or colonial folks bring. Because there are some good things. I stand here in my comfy cotton and not scratchy leather. Like, this is a good thing, right? I'm not sleeping in a teepee. I'm sleeping on a beautifully down comfort bed last night, right? And the other eye is that we lift up and hold Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and doing, and we put them in concert with one another. And because we're a Two-Spirit Dry Lab, we take a slightly spin on that, is the Two-Spirit eye seeing approach, and we put them into dialogue, these two knowledge systems into dialogue. Our meetings of work are all done in a circle. It is how we are formed, and it is how we are led. We are non-hierarchical, meaning that it is collaborative, non-hierarchical, and there is a consensus decision-making processes for the lab. We are a lab of and for shared leadership. Our team was drawn together with a unity of purpose and a deep commitment to consensus decision-making processes with the aim or requirement of acceptance of all lab members. And these are combined with the following principles or tools of leadership. 1, equality and conversational turn-taking, the talking circle protocols. We all have a voice, and each voice is equal to one another. Taking the time to get to know one another. In Cree, as articulated by Sean Wilson, as well as like Evelyn Steinhauer from the University of Alberta, really do a beautiful job of like saying all knowledge is relational. a priori to knowledge is relationship. Like you can have a cure for cancer, but if you don't have a network to share that knowledge in it, or you as a researcher use such heady and inaccessible language that no one understands what the heck you're talking about, do you have a cure for cancer? The answer is no. So we might as well lean into the relationship and build beautiful, strong relationships with co-creation of knowledge, as well as the co-sharing of that knowledge. And finally, listening intently or actively are what we call deep listening. Not only do we hear what their people are saying, but we also listen into the void of what are they not saying. And we're just like trying to figure that out. And finally, these above components create a possibility for psychological safety. And you can see already within this slide that there's a two-eyed seeing approach. We wouldn't say psychological, it's doing work the good way, right? And it results in the following outcomes: supporting one another so that we can bring forth the best ideas, working together in mindful, respectful, and I would even say loving ways. There's deep commitment amongst lab members. And then finally, developing innovative capabilities. So this is our model that we've been working, our conceptual model of how we work. And so the Two-Spirit Dry Lab sits in the center or the node, and we work with LGBT community-based organizations like the Reaffirm Collaborative. We also work with Indigenous communities, like the BC Assembly of First Nations, the BC Association of Aboriginal Friendship Centers, and where those two intersect, we work with Two-Spirit organizations like Nanaki Nanalusa or the Edmonton Two-Spirit Society. We also are housed at BCC's, the BC Center for Disease Control, Simon Fraser University, the Community-Based Research Center, as well as many other community partners. And what we do is, and how we work, I mean, there's no cab in our process. Like 54% of our leaders of the lab are Indigenous. And the lab is the cab, but the cab is, but the thing is that they're self-actualizing. What I find highly problematic is that I've been a part of many other CAB, or community advisory boards. I can give you advice, like, that's a nice red cowl shirt. Maybe it's a little too big. That's my advice, right? And you're like, yeah, thanks, Noodle. I like this size. And you can choose to ignore my advice. Where for the Two-Spirit Dry Lab is that we have 30 some members, and they set the direction. It's consensus decision-making process. We move as one. There is no need for a cap. And so when we meet with, like, let's say a community partner, like the BC Assembly of First Nations, they're like, hey, BC Assembly of First Nations, what are your research needs for or resources that you need to either develop or to expand or to do good work with Two-Spirit people? And they become a de facto lab member. And so like they may like, we need data to inform a social marketing campaign on suicide and suicidality. We're like, cool, we can do that. And so they are constituting, they're not advising. We're just saying, give us your research question and put us to work, and we work in service to a community. And this is an effort, and this is a critique. I don't like the word critique, an observation and reflection to the current research system in which around knowledge translation, in which that the researcher often sit in isolation, monastic. They say, I am going to count purple widgets. And so they sit in isolation, they build a beautiful survey instrument, and then they like do their analysis and they count purple widgets, right? Then you have to take that to know. Within Western knowledge production, knowing and doing are separate. There's a bifurcation. So to know purple widgets, and then once you've like figured out what your purple widget analysis, then you have to take it over to the doing, and you have to like sell it to policymakers, decision funders, and practitioners. And you need a role of a knowledge translation or knowledge broker, implementation science. Like there's so many terms for that to bridge that chasm. For us, what we do is it's Indigenous, well, let me just move this down here. For Indigenous relational knowledge translation. And so for us, and how the lab works, is we say, hey, lab members, 35 lab members, who wants to join our team? Who wants to get into the canoe? And we're all going to have different roles within our canoe. You have a navigator, you have a steerer. I like the individual in the green pants, like, yeah, I'm not going to row today. I'm just here for the journey, right? Cool. And our community partner gets into the canoe with us. Then what we say, hey, community partner, where do you want to start on your journey? And here's a water teaching. Do you want to start in a creek? And that would be like a program or a project specific role. Initiative, right? And then that creek flows into a river, which is like policy work and policy research. Or do we want to go into the delta or to the big body of lake, or do you want to do cultural and beyond research? Where do you want to go? Rather than us sitting in isolation and say, we're going to count purple widgets, we humbly meet with our community partners who are members of the lab, de facto members of the lab. You tell us, what do you want to do and where do you want to go on this journey? And so you can kind of see that this stands in opposition to that and how we bridge the chasm by structurally of how we're doing the work, is that we do not have, like, knowing and being and doing is all one, which is an Indigenous ways of doing that work. Now, we've been primarily working from the Sex Now survey, which is one of Canada's largest and longest national periodic survey for those who identify on the masculine spectrum over the age of 15 and have had sex with another male within the last 5 years. What I'm going to do is look at from our work from the 2015 data set and then how we improve that. Oh no, the the 2018 survey.
How to hide that.
Can you hide it? Can you come over? Yes.
If you go to more, just click on more. And then hide floating meeting controls.
There we go. Oh no.
That was one down.
There we go. And then I gotta hide that one.
If you hit escape.
There we go. And then I go back to desktop. And then I just hide this. Oh no. Okay. I'll just keep on talking. Perfect. There we go. And through our work with the 2015 data set, we offered some guidance for the 2018 Sex Now survey to better capture health-related and experiential knowledge of Indigenous participants. So in the 2015 survey, Two-Spirit was showed up in like Q1 and for gender identity, and Two-Spirit was offered as an option. Also in Q2 around sexual identity, Two-Spirit was offered in the 2015 survey. And then way back in the survey in question 17, it was like, what best describes your ethnic and cultural origins? And Aboriginal was used at that time. If we looked and we ran the numbers, about 4.5% of the overall sample size were Aboriginal, and that's in Canada, it's constitutionally defined. We're giving us an N value of 363. Of that, of the overall sample size, 156 participants selected Two-Spirit in either Q1 or Q2. And I was like, shnikes, that's huge, right? And I was like, tap the brakes. Of those 156, how many also selected Aboriginal in Q70? And we found that 62% of the respondents were not Aboriginal. I'm like, that doesn't sit well with me. I'm just trying to figure out what the health challenges are for Two-Spirit people, right? So what we did was we offered the following guidance for the 2018 census, 2018 Sex Now survey. And so what we advocated is that if someone selected Indigenous, then they were given the choice here in Canada, we break down Indigenous or Aboriginal to First Nations, Métis, Inuit. And then we also opened up, prefer to self-describe. Maybe they want to describe I am Nehiyô rather than First Nations. I would write in Nehiyô like the US census data allows. Or prefer not to say, because sometimes it's not safe to say. And so if the individual selected First Nations or Métis or Inuit, then and only then did the participant get the question, are you Two-Spirit, yes or no? And this is question number 1 or 2 in your demographic section. We were like, you can figure out the whole sexual identity and gender identity, you can do and get on with your bad self. I've honored my two-spirit here within this racial, ethnic, and cultural question. And now I'm given the choice of, like, for my gender identity, I can say, how am I showing up in the world, Western world? I can say that I am man, a man, or I can say non-binary, or I can actually write in two-spirit. What is my sexual identity? Like when I'm out dancing at a club on Friday night, often shirtless, I'm a gay man, but I stand before you as a two-spirit community organizer, and when I'm doing work with my First Nations people, I'm a Yahweh. And so you get a much more robust, or an individual says, I'm two-spirit here, and then writes in two-spirit for gender and writes in two-spirit for sexual. That's saying they are two-spirit through and through, and that's how they're showing up in their world. I mean, so you can see the nuancing of that. So when we implemented this method, and we also supported, and I helped with the recruitment, in 2015, overall, 4.5%, we doubled that to around 9% of Indigenous respondents. And this was in person and gave us for 2018 as an N of 314. Also, the breakdown below First Nations Métis does not include the 43 respondents who did not specify whether or not that they were First Nations Métis. Those are the folks that are prefer self-describe or prefer not to say. Of the 271 remaining, 60% were First Nations, 40% were Métis, 3% were Inuk. 42% of the Indigenous respondents said that they were two-spirit. 58% said that they weren't two-spirit, which is cool. Because I'm like, oh, I have some work to do with educating. Over half of my Indigenous respondents did not say that they were two-spirit, or maybe they have a better way of describing it, right? 0% of the respondents were not Indigenous. And so right now we're in conversations with the Canadian Census Bureau, StatsCan, and looking at the possibility of having this included with the 2026 Canadian Census, this method. Hopefully it goes through because then we would have access to administrative data. The Canadian Institute for Health Research, which is the NIH of the North, asked Travis and I, the other co-PI for the lab, if we would type up our method. And so this is a one-sheeter. The URL is down at the bottom, but you also have it in your paper copy. And there will be emails, a little packet that I had sent around to everyone who's fine. Also, from 2015, there was also this beautiful question, Q59. In the past year, which of the following resources have you gone to? And there were like psychiatrists, registered counselors, like all Western modalities, right? And then there was like none of the above. I know Indigenous people who go to elders. I know that there are Indigenous people that go to knowledge keepers and sweats and sun dances and ceremony for help. And I was like, why don't we ask and give some, so that the options are reflective of Indigenous people, so that Indigenous people can see themselves within, their realities are reflected back within the options. You know, have they gone to an elder or a knowledge keeper? But you can see how problematic this is. In that, as an Indigenous person, without having these options, and that are going to elders, going to knowledge keepers, going to ceremony for these help, that they would select none of the above. And then we as good researchers, we would do like, oh, shnikes, no Indigenous people are going to clinical psychs. We must develop a beautiful outreach plan and we must vest and get like all this. No, you've asked a really crappy ass question. They're going. And there are there. So we must look at how we ask the questions. Do our questions and our survey instruments reflect the reality of those that we want to engage? Now, here's the other thing that we're being super radical in decolonizing and challenging some basic core tenets of health research. There's this beautiful cartoon of like the apple says, hey, we're both round, we both grow on trees, we're both fruit, that must make us the same. And orange goes, yeah, noodle, no, we're not the same, right? You would know that is in testing in the null hypothesis. The null hypothesis, we assume that there are no differences between groups. And as a result of if we find a difference, this results in innumerable and ad nauseum studies that establish that health indicators for Indigenous people differ from non-Indigenous people. not contributing any further to knowledge, but merely rehashing what is known. Also within this, structurally within testing and the null hypothesis, it places the responsibility to change on the unhealthier group. By accepting these differences exist, we acknowledge that health and inequities exist, and that's all we do. So what the heck are you saying, Harlan? Often within research, we have a broad data set, let's say sex now. Then what we do is we extract a subpop, let's say Indigenous in our case. And because we assume these two groups are the same, we can do a compare and contrast. So the beautiful example, if you look at the 2016 HIV surveillance report from the BCCDC on page 11, there's a statement, and this is quintessentially null hypothesis testing. Indigenous women are 20 times greatly impacted by HIV than white women. Page 11. Is that a fair comparison? If I was born in India, I'm going to die in India. I'm never going to be white. Why should I be compared to white people? All systems have been set up by white people for white people, and they're always going to have better outcomes because the systems have been set up by them for them. And we will always be in a less than position as minorities if you're non-white, non-heterosexual, non-male, non-man. And then what do we do to close that gap? Do we make the white women have the same rates of HIV as Native women? No. Implicit within that is that we just have to make the Native women more like the white women. In testing in the null hypothesis, and that statement 20 times greatly impacted by HIV than white women, not only becomes, I would argue, as a site of white supremacy, where white people will always be the comparator group and they will always be the yardstick. And we will always be in a less than position. And for Indigenous people, it also becomes a site of colonization. And implicitly, how do we close the gap? We just have to make the Native people more like the white people. That's not cool research, I think. So what we do is broad data set, sex now, we extract the subpop, Indigenous in our case, ignore that, and we do intra-group comparisons, quantitatively. And if we go back to that little cartoon, look how much variability in comparisons that we can do within the apple subset. Like yellow compared to orange compared to red. There are better baking apples than there are like eating apples. Or look at the variability within the orange, from the sweetness to the bitter, to the size of the pith, to the number of seeds. There's so much to compare. So if you pick up one of the handouts that I gave you, the drivers of sexual health knowledge is one study in which that we did not use testing in the null hypothesis. We extracted the Indigenous respondents, and then what we did was we just zoomed in and we did an intra-group analysis, non-null hypothesis, as our response to that, I would say, shoddy and very, very easy and not cool research. Also, we're being super radical. There's this quote from, let me hide that, from Audre Lorde, who is this incredible social justice warrior. For those of us, and you've taken any gender courses, you probably heard the statement, you know, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. But I think that we have to flesh out that quote a little bit. Those of us who stand outside of the circle of this society's definition of acceptable woman. Those of us who have been forged in the crucibles of difference. Those of us who are poor, who are lesbian, who are Black, who are older. Know that survival is not an academic skill. It is learning how to take our differences and make them our strengths. For the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And we fundamentally agree with that. However, because of reconciliation, because of two-eyed seeing, what do we do with that? And so what we do is we take a little bit of a spin on Audre and say, there are some good master's tools, like quantitative analysis and looking at mathematical relationships. But when quant is married with the null hypothesis, not cool. But quant is good. So what we do is we use some of the master's tools, the good ones. We ignore the master's house and we go down the street and we build our own village and community. Again, you've already seen not a house, a community. So what does that look like in research? So this would be emblematic, our placeholder of the master's house. And this is this beautiful theory. It's not that beautiful. The theory of syndemics, right? That was came up by this non-Indigenous researcher, Meryl Singer, in 1994, that was looking at HIV within the Latino community within Connecticut. And what Singer showed was that there were these mutual reinforcing interactions between social conditions and disease. And Singer showed like synergy and epidemic, right? So that an individual that is experiencing violence like DV or IPV may increase that chance of that, the chances of that individual getting HIV by 10%. Now don't quote me on the 10, I just gotta keep the numbers for this big old noodle hole. An individual who is like experiencing substance use, 10%. An individual who is experiencing adverse mental health like systemic racism or 10%. So an individual who is experiencing violence, substance use, or mental health, 2 or more of these social conditions, you would say 10 plus 10 plus 10, like a 30% chance. And what Singer showed empirically is that it may increase their chances of 95%. It's a mutual reinforcing interaction between social conditions and disease. And we're like, and I remember everyone and their dog is like writing papers in syndemics, and it's like the new hot theory and like blah, 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 right? And I was like, cut the brakes. When I go to ceremony and I go into the lodge, my forehead hits the ground and I say this Sioux expression, Mitakuyosin. Mitakuyosin means all my relations. But I think a closer translation, because it's a heart language and it's ceremonial, is everything is connected and everything is related. Everything. Does that sound familiar? You can see by this line drawing that everything is connected. The sky, the moon, the sun, the turtle, the earth, the people. And so for that paper in the study around the drivers of sexual health knowledge, rather than using the theory of syndemics, we used our theory of the theory of Mitakuyosin that we know is true. And we're being super radical because we're saying, hey, Singer, get some humility. To think you came up with this term on yourself. You get the academic post. You get all of the accolades. And what do we get? We get a forehead hitting the ground as we go in and out of lodge and we say Mitakuyosin. And so we mathematically or statistically show how everything is related in the drivers of sexual knowledge. And we're not using the theory of syndemics. We're not going to look at that master's house. So that is how we're being kind of super radical in how do we know that our stories, our truths, our way that we know that the world works around us, and how are those implications that are playing out within research. So the last thing is looking at some water teachings. And this is a picture that we took when we were in Northern California and doing work with the Yurok Wiyat, and there's one more, I'll bring it up later. From Hubana Haidegwai and some of the work that we're doing with First Nations communities of putting this all into action and what does it look like. So also within the handout is looking at the phases of relational accountability, but also how we work and looking at our moon teachings, right? Our logo was designed by Margaret August. And then the logo is split down the middle for a balance between masculine and femininity. And you can see that forehead is 2 salmons because most of our lab members are based here in Coast Salish territory. And so for the end, it's also a moon that shows the many phases and the dynamic aspect that should be within research. So what we do is that within the new moon is that a relationship is either established or reestablished. We're like, hey, Upa, what are your research needs? Like, or who are you? This is us, right? And then in the next phase within the waxing crescent, we get to know one another. And then our first quarter, after we've gotten to know one another, then what we're doing is we're finding out our research needs and wants are for our community partner. Then within the next phase, the refinement of that research question. Like if they're asking about pet ownership and health, we're like, we didn't ask pet ownership. We can't answer that question. Can we refine it and get it down to this way, right? Okay, in sex now, we do ask about pet ownership, so we can do that analysis. Within the full moon, after we've gotten our marching orders and we have our research question or our resource development need, then the lab goes into full reflection and the work of data analysis or resource development. And then within the waning gibbous is that the initial presentation or findings and research is then given back to the community and say, did we hear correctly? Do you have any other questions? And we met with Nanaki Nanalusa and they asked us some broad questions. When we did that preliminary poll, they're like, this is interesting. Can we zoom in on here? And it was all around, and I was like, yeah. So we went back and we did another analysis, right? We're going to go to Haida for that nation, and we've been developing resources. We take drafts back to them. Is this what we heard? Can this be made better? Or is this good? And then we can just go right into distribution, right? And then within the third quarter, a final report or finding is and resources transferred over to them. That's their question, that's their knowledge. And then within the last phase, in the waning crescent, we go back to our community partner and say, hey, community partner, can we type up and publish our results and work? And if the community partner says no, we say, cool, because the work, they've asked a question, we've given them the information, and they're already doing it. The medicine is already out there. And it's also being mindful of respect their question, their knowledge. We're worker bees. But if they say yes, publish, then we go back, we do the whole little typing up, journal shop, hopefully it's a tier 1 journal, and we publish. And then we begin that whole new cycle again with the publisher, the new moon, the crescent. It just keeps on going around, and it's all this relationship building. But it's following the teachings of the moon and what the phase is, how that's impacted. Also, I just wanted to share with you, goodness, is that this is our conceptual framework of how our research happens. I've consulted, but also I've been a part of many, many review committees, and I see these conceptual frameworks, which are like squares and circles and lines and dotted lines and arrows, right? And it stands alone by themselves. And that's the commodification of knowledge. Where Merrill Singer can base an entire career off of his little model. And they own it. All we can say is that we own the relationship, that we're bound to these relationships, but I can't own these moon teachings. We as Native people, we all have these moon teachings. We don't own them. All I can do is that I can own myself in relation to Hupa and Haida. And so for Haida, we're getting busy to return for the second annual Two-Spirit Pride celebration. We have a lot of resources that they asked us for. We have draft forms that we're going to get back to them. For Hupa, we are still in the process of what are you really looking for to help support your Two-Spirit relatives within your community. So the We At people, they came up, the band council came up, they're doing the work and we're supporting them in that work. So Two-Spirit within health research. When Two-Spirit data is collected in culturally safe and affirming ways, Two-Spirit researchers I won't slip, just health researchers. I want a world of only Two-Spirit health research. Are given the opportunity to promote rigorous science that considers sex, anatomical characteristics, and all genders, especially within a decolonial framework of embodied social characteristics. Research conducted in this way has the potential to expand our understanding of health within an intersectional framework that consider how determinants such as ethnicity, race, socioeconomic status, disability, sexual orientation, migration status, age, geography, mutually constitute sex and/or gender. What is those relationships are, and can you do Two-Spirit segregated analysis of that? By bringing these considerations into focus, they can help better formulate research to better inform policies and programs that are more relevant, respectful, and I would say honoring and loving and reflective to the diverse